G'day legends. I bet you didn't expect to see me. Well, I hope that you are really well and I hope that you are having a fantastic day. Currently all going to plan right now. I should be recovering in ICU following an operation on my brain to take some samples of the tumour that is growing inside of my head that will then go to the oncology team. So my partner Lily will be posting this video. Not knowing when I'll be back to making videos, I wanted to give you something special. And a lot of people have requested this interview. Alex from HistoryLegends is a fantastic YouTuber. But what you don't see is him behind the screen. And he's even better. He's a kind, thoughtful, and incredibly intelligent bloke who would do anything for you. So thank you, HistoryLegends, for doing this interview with me very last minute. Now, legends, YouTube is my full-time job, and this surgery and in the 12 months of chemotherapy that will follow have really thrown a curveball at me. So if you would like to support me while I'm forced to have some time off, please consider the links below. There's the PayPal, the Patreon, the merch, and also the Buy Me a Coffee. And I really do appreciate it, and I'll get back to making videos as soon as I can. And on the very small chance that things don't go well, thank you all for coming on this amazing around the world journey of discovery with me. And I'll leave you with this. The truth does not change according to our ability to stomach it. Legends, thank you for everything. Please enjoy this interview. Well, g'day legends. I'm sure you're going to see someone who you are very familiar with in all his beauty and all his knowledge. I'm not sure which one is further on, but HistoryLegends, mate. Firstly, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. I can't refuse this to you.
I could shame you. I could be like, yes, I'm doing chemo and you're not even going to join me.
No, it's my pleasure.
No, mate, thank you very much. And I just want to say in the beginning that, you know, most people know you of what they see on the screen, you know, right now, but knowing you sort of, you know, behind the public, you know, knowing you privately, I will say, honestly, you're one of the nicest guys in the business. You're a fantastic bloke. So I want to thank you, like, for everything in private as well.
It means a lot to me. Thank you. Thank you.
You're a legend, man. Look, I don't even know where to start, but I just want to start with, what is your sort of general assessment of the war in Ukraine? Like, right here now, sort of over the past like weeks, what are you seeing as the major changes?
As a little disclaimer, I'm still a bit jet lagged because I came back a couple of days ago. So if I fall asleep,
well, I'm a bit hungover from a barbecue I had yesterday for like free off with the boys from the army. So we're both going to push through.
Exactly. All right. So how I see the entire situation, that was the question, right? All right. Well, okay. First thing, is crazy that we're still talking about this war, almost 2023, 2024, 2025, almost 3 years into the war. Yeah. And I still remember how in the first few weeks I said to myself, there's no point covering this war. It's going to be over before anyone can really cover it. And it dragged on for weeks, then months, then years. So where to start? I made a video. Let's talk about the video I did on the battle of attrition. That seems to have been picked up by a lot of people. A lot of people on the opposite side of the spectrum said it's nonsense and that Russia is actually losing the war of attrition. I think anyone serious can laugh at this statement. I think right now Ukraine is struggling with the war of attrition, the fact that they're mobilizing more and more people. But yeah, they're struggling from a material perspective, from a human perspective, and they're relying more and more on the West, which is more and more reluctant to support Ukraine, especially since the West is not used to fighting these sort of wars anymore. So, yeah, it's going to be hard. And like I said in many videos, the big problem for Ukraine is that a lot of its citizens have left the country. And you have some of the brightest people, you know, the people with degrees or in tech or something, they're gone. You have 2 million men at least that are gone. So what do you do when you're already fighting as a nation that has a numerical disadvantage against Russia, and now you have even more people that are gone, and you're just drafting the few men that are left. So how long can that last? And overall, I think the biggest problem for Ukraine. So on one end, we can say Ukraine fought much better than what we all thought, and that's undeniable. Nobody can take that away from them. Like I said at the beginning, everybody thought this would be over within weeks, and then we're still there. At the same time, it's because the public was misinformed on the true strength of the Ukrainian army, and it was one of the best armies in Europe because they were actually fighting since 2014, and they have been steadily reinforcing their capabilities. So whereas the entire NATO countries were still fighting in Afghanistan against insurgents that are not the best equipped, the Ukrainians had a real taste of battle in 2014, 2015 against the Russians, and they knew that eventually a new round would happen. So the Ukrainians were more prepared than we think. Now, from a material perspective, the problem is that they don't produce that much stuff in Ukraine anymore. And they depend on ammunition, equipment from the West, like I said. So that's the real problem. I think if we can summarize it, the Ukrainians did a very good fight, but they have a lot of internal problems that they still haven't solved, like corruption and just pure disorganization. They're not organized, and they have corruption at every level. I think your friend talked about it. But from what I heard on the Ukraine side, at every level, there's corruption. So it's very hard to. I don't even think that the people at the top really know what's actually happening, because at every level, there's the papers are changed, and they don't even know the casualties probably. So that's one thing, and I think they're disorganized in a way that, for example, instead of reinforcing all the brigades that they have this urge to create new units. Why? I never understood why. So on one end, you have brigades that are at 50%, and then they're creating entire new batches of brigades.
Yeah.
I'm like, why? I don't know why. I tried to rationalize it, tried to think about it. It doesn't make sense. And the people I talk to in Ukraine that are fighting, they say that, again, it's another scheme because that way you have more brigade commanders, more salaries, like you have more staff. It's Ukraine. Like nobody really understands why they're doing this. So yeah, I'm not saying that everything is perfect on the Russian side, not at all. Before anyone comes at me, uh, disclaimer: Willie and I, we're banned from both Ukraine and Russia. There's no way we're going there.
Right.
So there's no way we're going there. So this is the cost of being a neutral observer of the war. But the Russians have their own problems, but since they have more resources, well, it's okay. They can afford to lose more resources as well.
Yeah, you speak on a couple of very interesting points there, like about, sort of manning new brigades rather than reinforcing old brigades. And in the like simplicity, if you just look at your attritional war, protracted war doctrine, it's very clear you should never have a unit drop below 70% strength and focus on strengthening existing brigades with experience rather
Mhm.
than making new
Oh,
brigades. And this is one of these things that it just seems like these like bouncing ball of the attritional war doctrine. One thing I see is I think the Russians very early, like, and I mean very early, I mean the first year, after initial large failures, huge losses, very quickly went, oh shit, okay, this is attritional. And they've just followed this bouncing ball of it takes 18 months to make fortifications, reinforce brigades. It takes 18 months. We saw like very little offensive operations for 18 months rather than Wagner.
mhm, mhm.
But it still seems like to me, Ukraine hasn't fully accepted that attritional protracted war and that they're hoping at some point to reintroduce maneuver warfare into the battlefield,
Yeah.
of which introducing maneuver I don't know if it is possible in a modern conflict with ISR drones everywhere, people being able to just see absolutely everything, and the difficulty of maneuver warfare. Like maneuver, people don't understand how difficult maneuver armor warfare is. Like I was in the Australian military, which by all means is a very highly trained,
Yeah.
well-funded military, and I was in armored infantry. Like we were a mechanized infantry unit. It is unfathomably difficult. With guys that have done it for 10 years, we would have in training, it's not even on a two-way range, we would have problems doing armored assaults. There are so many moving parts. It's so difficult. And I think that's where we've ended up in the situation we're in, is because I think the Russians very early accepted that attrition. And I think the Russians have more uh, even psychologically, this idea of, yeah, we're just going to have large losses and we have to absorb these losses,
Hmm.
and willing to actually just launch an attritional phase of war rather than to constantly try and reintroduce maneuver.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And but I think okay, how I see it, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I think the Russians had Plan A, Ukraine in February 2022. They had two plans. Plan A, Ukraine collapses in 2 months and that's it. Plan B, it's a long war. They're like, shit, it's Plan B, and then they started preparing for it. Now, I think that the what the West doesn't understand is the Russian way of thinking. Because when you study the history of Russia and its military, um, you see that they can be very cold and extremely resilient, very stubborn, much more than the West thinks. The West thinks that whenever Ukraine made a move and a victory, Russia's going to collapse. You think so? The Germans were in front of Moscow.
Mm.
You think they're gonna collapse for her son? Napoleon took Moscow. The Russians burned the city down. They kept fighting. Do you think they care about lands in Ukraine that they just captured 2 weeks ago? They don't care. The Russians took the land, but they had no problem withdrawing from huge swaths of land because it improved their strategic position. And I think that's the main criticism I have towards the Ukraine is that they're not capable of doing this. They don't, either from a political perspective or I don't understand, but they can't just retreat to better lines and rebuild the military. They hold on to everything.
Yeah.
So, and I think that the Russians also learned from a lot of their mistakes. Remember how they started the war with their BTGs, which everybody talked about, and it just flopped. And they just reverted back to brigades and divisions. That and it works. Having now we have divisions that are attacking, and the problem with the Ukraine is that their unit on the map is brigade, but they don't have a system above that. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why they can't fully launch offensives because they don't have this division level or even corps. So you have a central organ that micromanages everything, and it doesn't work.
I think something too that I see that I'm like, okay, but how's this going to look different from an infantry perspective and our mechanized infantry is we see these Russian attacks and, they have large losses, sort of up the guts attack armored warfare that we see.
Yeah.
I see people, look at how, they're just throwing these men into this fight and this is hopeless and this and that. Now,
Yeah.
one, that is a view of it, but you can also, you're not
Mm.
taking into account other maneuver elements. But let's just take it from the most simple, you see an armored assault and it really go to shit. My question is, though, I'm like, yeah, but how else is this going to be done in modern warfare? In a war of
Exactly.
attractive attrition, where everything
Exactly.
is mined, artillery's everywhere, drones see
Yeah.
everything. I'm like, people going, they're driving, in a single file line up this. And I'm like, and people, you'll see Russians say this as well about when a Ukrainian column is hit. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't really see any other way of doing this anymore because you should assume everything's been seen by a drone. Like everything has been seen.
No, no,
You're
no,
moving
no.
your armored vehicle tactically 10 Ks behind the line. Don't bother. You're being seen by thermal or this or that. And I'm like, if we see, and if I will say a Ukrainian offensive through like built-in lines, I'm like, we're going to see the same thing. You can't outmaneuver a 7-layered defensive position. You're going to have to,
Mhm.
at some point, accept an attritional
Mhm.
break in somewhere. And people call out the tactics. I'm like, well, if you've got a better tactic, someone will want to listen to it. But I don't, with even my background, I'm like, you're not doing this cool flanker around this position. You can't do it.
Yeah, and I think there's also a lot of bias is that we only have the footage, for example, of the column that got hit, but we don't have footage of, let's say, the column that zipped by, dropped the troops, and went back.
Yeah.
So this is confirmation bias. Oh, look at the Russian column, they got destroyed. But maybe that day you had 10 columns that advanced. That one got destroyed out of luck, but the others all completed their mission. So that's something we forget. The Russians move a lot of troops along the front, and the Ukrainians, the drones are successful, but like we see, they're not as successful as they claim to be. So the Russians can move a lot of forces to the front.
Yeah.
And also the Russians, what let's say the pro-Ukrainian spectrum don't want to see is that the Russians are not using meat wave attacks. You see a lot of high-level commentators that are professors at schools and war colleges, whatever, even talk about meat waves, and it doesn't even make sense. A meat wave is when you have it's when you have an infantry-only force, which is not resembling what the Russians have at the moment. They have artillery, a, a massive advantage in firepower from vehicles, artillery. Why would they use human waves? Doesn't even make sense. So it's just, I think, propaganda terms that people like to use to cope with the fact that Ukraine is losing ground. So they say, yeah, we lost ground, but we inflicted 10 times more casualties on the Russians, which is nonsense.
Well, I believe one of the best videos I've seen recently, and I truly mean this, is your video on attritional war. That I think is it
You just say you're just saying this. I'm your guest, and you're
No, no, honestly, mate, I was actually telling my partner about it. I'm like, this video, I was like, I wish my production quality could be that bloody high. It's like 40 minutes, fantastic video. My 40 minutes is I'm just sitting here talking to a screen. But it honestly is really, really, it is fantastic. But this attritional aspect of it, which I can't see how anyone objectively can look at this and say that Ukraine is winning the attritional war, even just on population figures. And you break down a really good point in this of depending on what figures you believe, the Russian artillery advantage is somewhere between like 8 and like 15 or 16 times. Like it's unbelievably large.
yeah.
And then we hear the amount of casualties is primarily due to artillery.
Yeah.
And then you go, well, this doesn't really make sense that Ukraine need to be at least, a third of the casualties to be even competing with Russia in an attritional battle. But it's even at 1-to-1 is a really dire situation. And it's likely at the moment, I think it's likely it's not even that. You've got a massive, massive advantage in artillery. Although the Russians are on the offensive, you would suspect to take more casualties. But how much worse is it? Well, we don't know. But you're speaking on, people propaganda, you see these numbers of 600,000 killed and 30,000 on the other side. This doesn't make sense when you're talking about a 10 to 15 to 1 artillery advantage.
And even the myth of an attacking force taking more casualties, that's a myth. I mean, there's plenty of examples historically where the attacker took less casualties. Let's take Desert Storm.
Yeah.
The attacker inflicted 10 times more casualties on the defender. It all depends on the firepower. The US forces in Desert Storm had overwhelming firepower, air support, and they destroyed, I think it's even 20-to-1, the ratio of casualties. So it all depends on so many factors. I think the ratio of 3-to-1 for the attacker is the ratio needed to win the battle. It's
That's
never
the ratio
3
we'd
to
like to
1.
step into a fight with.
Exactly. It's not the
We
ratio
want
of
to fight
losses.
3-to-1. Yeah.
Because the more people the attacker has, actually, the less casualties they get because the defender just gets overwhelmed. So that's the basis. But yeah, I was shocked myself by all the research I've done. I was like, and this is from Western sources. I haven't used Russian sources. It's just like just putting the pieces together from Western reports. And I said, hold on, 14-1 advantage in firepower. I was shocked. I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
These poor Ukrainian guys, they go to the front and they're obliterated before knowing what happened. So I just feel bad for all these conscripts. Like I don't know what prospects of victory we can expect for Ukraine. Yeah, I don't really know what's the plan. But you know what? I was thinking about it the other day. So now Ukraine is mobilizing 30,000 a month and slowly. But I thought about this. What if Ukraine mobilized almost all its population on day one of the war?
Yeah,
I think it would have been a game changer.
I agree.
I mean, even if they had mobilized by the end of 2022, they would have tiered a new one to the Russians and probably ended the war there.
Yeah.
Because 2022 was really the moment the Russians were really on the back
On
foot.
the back. That was the opportunity. End of 22
Yeah.
was the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I was like, okay, you guys are winning. Like you guys are defending the homeland. Everybody's enthusiastic. Everybody knows what's happening. All right. You have all these masses of people volunteering. Well, they could have mobilized everyone. They're like, let's go. Even if people are not trained, it doesn't matter when you have that many people. And the situation for the Russians was bad. You know, the moment they left Kiev, it was a signal saying, okay, the Russians can be beaten back.
Yeah.
No matter what we say about the geopolitical situation between Ukraine and Russia, the Russians still left Kiev. And then they left Kharkiv. And then they left more places. Imagine the Ukrainians just mobilized 1 million men at once. And nobody had left the country by then. There wasn't the Battle of Bakhmut and all the meat grinders. I think that was the biggest mistake of the war for Ukraine, not to mobilize everyone on day one. And that's a good lesson for future countries to know. Because what made me think about it is like, when I think of World War One, so when I thought about World War One, I'm like, hold on, France and Germany both mobilized everyone on day one. So you didn't have any deserters, you didn't have people leaving because they were all in uniforms already.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the points I spoke on yesterday was with the chief of the forces who ended up fired, Valery Zaluzny. He, through channels we got that he requested 450 to 500,000 to be mobilized last year and ended up losing his job. And I spoke about yesterday. I'm like, I think he's 100% correct that last year, like 23, probably or a lot better in 2022. But if he got his wish, in 23 of 500,000 guys, the situation in Ukraine right now would be dramatically different to what we're seeing now. It turns out that he was correct. You just need men. And all the guys I speak to, it's all about, they're like, I don't care about F-16s. I don't even care about Storm Shadow.
Yeah.
The biggest things that are affecting us is fortifications and men. We just don't have dudes here. And some of the dudes that are here, the fortifications aren't good enough. They're not willing to defend them. So we'll pull back. And this is what they believe. The butterfly effect is if you've got the good fortification and somewhere, an area they believe they can defend, you'll have more guys stay, you'll lose less guys, and you'll use less ammunition as well. So, it's sort of a butterfly effect, but I can't believe this mobilization. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
And I think the key is mobilize 500,000 men at once. Because now, I don't know why the Ukrainians are using the system of every month they're taking 30,000. Maybe, I don't know, honestly, maybe they don't have the means to take all these people in at once. But again, you're at war. It's now or never.
Yeah.
It's better to have 500,000 people now than to have 1 million sprinkled over 4 years. You want them now. That way you can stop the enemy now and have rotations and have everything. But now what the Ukrainians are doing due to the attrition is that they're bringing in 30,000 people. They all get killed or wounded within a week, and it's just enough to last to the other month. It's atrocious. It's tragic. It's almost criminal.
Yeah. Well, why do you think there's such a reluctance to mobilize the 18 to 25? I know the demographic issues,
Mm.
but the your main fighting force of any nation in your infantry, like the average age of an infantryman is like 19, which is crazy because you're given, well, and armored guys, you got some 19-year-old in charge of a tank, or you've got 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds commanding troops. But what I've been saying is I understand the demographic issue, but these guys also could solve a large problem with their mobilization if you could do this. Why do you think there's such a reluctance? Because if it's existential, well, it's don't worry about the demographic issue. You're not going to have that issue if you lose the war, if you don't end up in this. It's this weird, impossible balance of do we want a future of people having children or do we want to have some level of victory or defense in the battlefield? What's your take on that?
I sort of understand the Ukrainians because I think there was a council of people that sat down and they had a very important discussion. I think one of the topics was what's the point of winning the war when there's nobody left after? I think that was one of the problems for Western countries after World War One. What's the point of winning when all the young men are gone?
Yeah.
Actually, that was one of the problems for France after World War One. There was this pacifist movement, and a lot of people said, "What's the point of going through another world war? We're gonna lose everyone, and even if we win it, it's gonna be a Pyrrhic victory, and there's gonna be nobody left." So there was this movement that said, "We cannot afford another war, the same as before." So I think the Ukrainians are like, okay, if we lose our youth, we have no future. It's simple. And I think they have understood that when you look at the demographic breakdown by age of Ukraine, there is a big peak of people from 40 to 45. This is the generation, I think, just before independence. So, whilst born in the Soviet Union, but just before Ukraine got independent. So they're 35 to 45, let's say. And they said, look, these guys, even 50, you can even add 50. These guys, they already had kids. It's a tragedy if they go, but they already did their duty to the universe, if I can say it. You know, they already passed on to the next generation. It's tragic. We're talking about human beings as if they're numbers or spare parts, but that's how they thought of it. They're like, okay, these guys, they can sit in a trench. And in a way, I think they also used Wagner tactics as an example. I think a lot of people used Wagner tactics as a canvas as to what to do. So we all remember what your friend said about Wagner tactics back in the days. They said they put the newbies, the prison conscripts, in some trenches just to hold the ground, and they're gonna take the brunt of the enemy artillery. Well, the experts, they sit back, they only counterattack, and they go in and out. But the ground, the ones that are going to suffer from artillery are the newbies. So I think the Ukrainians are using the same tactics and the same way of thinking. Like, okay, we cannot afford to lose the guys that are well trained, and whoever survives the first few months, good for him. But otherwise, we're just gonna put cannon fodder to plug in the gaps. So I think that's how they see it. I think the biggest problem is not the 18 to 25-year-old population, because if they announce the mobilization of these guys, they're all going to leave the country. Many of them are left. I'm sure many of them have left already.
Well, I've
So,
spoken about a lot of these guys would have been legal to leave. We're now, heading up to the third year of war. Some of these guys were 15 when the war began, too. And I would dare say that if a 15 or 16-year-old left the country in 22, 23, 24, 15, 16, 17-year-old when they could with their parents or their mum,
mhm.
I think it'd be very unlikely that they're coming back to then be conscripted into a war. Maybe some, but maybe not en masse.
Yeah, absolutely. And now you have 2 million Ukrainian men abroad. It's a big problem. Whenever I talk about this, a lot of pro-Russians get mad by saying, "Oh, you just want them to be sent to die," and I'm like, "No, that's not how it is." But as an analyst, you have to look at the truth, and the fact that so many people are abroad is a problem because it restricts the margin of maneuver of the Ukrainian army so much. It's hard. They still have a human potential in Ukraine, for sure, but it's difficult. And the fact that the casualties are so heavy doesn't make the task so as easy. There's no volunteers, and nobody wants to go into the infantry. It's easy. Nobody. So yeah, the Ukrainian army on paper is huge, but everyone's hiding.
Right. It is.
Whereas,
Yeah. You go. Yeah.
whereas, and where I wanted to go with this, I think Russia also made a very smart decision. Okay, check this out. Russia, Ukraine, they're like brother countries. Like everybody understands that they're very tough, both of them. It's like a civil war in so many aspects. It's like a civil war. Now, the big difference between Ukraine and Russia is I think Russia has more history of being an independent country that takes decisions. Ukraine is a very new country. They never had this amount of responsibility ever. So a lot of decisions are sort of last minute, if I can say. For the Russians, they know that there is corruption in the country. And they know that if they wanted to mobilize more people, so many people would bribe their way out of the mobilization, just like what's happening right now in Ukraine, or they would simply leave the country. And by leaving the country, they would not help the Russian economy anymore. How many people? Russia is also suffering from demographic problems. So if you have millions of Russians leaving the country, it's tax revenue that's gone. They might never come back. You don't want that. So what is the solution to get people into the army if you can't forcefully drag them? You increase the amount of money you give them, and then you have volunteers. And now the pay for being a Russian soldier is actually very high, to some extent higher than being a US Army soldier.
It's way higher than what I was getting paid when I was in them. It's significantly higher. And it's not only higher if you put it into the actual use case of that money too, that, a loaf of bread is significantly cheaper in Russia than it is in Australia. It's extremely high. I think once you actually, like the bonuses I think they're offering in Kursk, when you put it through to like how much equivalent is that in like Australian dollars, it was like $150,000. Insane.
Imagine.
Yeah.
So the
That's
Russian
generational
government,
wealth to a lot of people. Like in Russia, that is generational wealth. And people, they ever go, why would someone sign up to die for this? If you put it hundreds of thousands of dollars in front of a 18, 19-year-old kid, even here in Australia, or they're going to be like, yeah, well, this will look after my family if I die. I think people underestimate how large that actually is.
actually, I think it's more like, again, fathers that do it, not so much the young, because the young, they like, oh, I have my entire life to make money. But it's family fathers or that uncle, that never had kids or something. They're like, okay, you know what? Take the money. I'll go. And I think that's how. But the important is that Russia found a way around their corruption problem. And since Russia has more money than Ukraine, they can also afford this way of doing. And it's very interesting again, because Western countries should study this to understand if there is a war, what are the possibilities? So one is mobilize everyone on day one. And if you don't, well, you have to offer huge amounts of cash to have volunteers. And imagine the people in Russia, it's mostly guys from the Ural Mountains and Siberia that are volunteering. The average salary is what? $500 US per month. And all of a sudden you tell these guys and they can get 5,000 a month.
Yeah.
They're never going to make that amount of money. No way. So Russia found a way to get a lot of troops. And the thing is, the more troops they have, once again, it's the same thing we talked about before. The more troops they have, the more maneuvers they can do, and the less casualties they end up having. Because if you attack on multiple fronts at the same time, the Ukrainians cannot bombard all these positions. if you attack on multiple axes, the Ukrainian artillery and all the drone operators will have to focus on certain sectors. So one sector, yes, one axis of attack is going to suffer greatly for the Russians, but the others are going to push through no problem.
Yeah.
So they're going to get ground and they can open another front. So for example, in Kursk right now, it's not looking good for the Ukrainians.
This was actually my exact question that I was thinking up in my head is this is where Kursk doctrinally made no sense to me too. If Russia is trying to overwhelm you at multiple points, I don't get why then you'd give them you extend your own front line and you give them more points to attack on to try and plug.
I think we don't know really what happened in that conference room because I think only like a handful of people knew of the operation. I think the idea was good because they attacked a sector of the front that was not defended and to show the world that Ukraine is not done. However, the moment they got bogged down, they should have retreated. So the moment they saw that they got bogged down, it's not ideal. And I think most analysts were right when they said that the goal of this offensive was to stall the Pokrovsk one. It didn't work out. Okay, it was a raid, a bold and daring operation. It didn't work, pull back.
Yeah.
There's no point because now what happened, and this is where I'm very critical of the Ukrainian command, is because they pulled out all the elite guys. Now the guys standing in the trenches are conscripts. Like how many times do you see on Telegram, they say, oh, he was conscripted 3 months ago. Or these guys are prison convicts that got into the Ukrainian military. So the elite forces of Ukraine have been pulled out a while ago. So why stay? And this is the problem I have with the Ukraine military. They don't have this tactical flexibility that the Russians have. When the Russians were launching operations that flopped completely, they would pull out. They said, okay, never mind. Let's reform our lines.
Yeah.
So now the Kursk operation is a flop, but they're going to hold on to it. And that's what the Ukrainians do. And the worst is that from the reports I read during World War II, the Germans said the same thing about the Soviets. They said these guys are so stubborn, but sometimes they fight to the end for the most useless positions. The Germans could not understand sometimes why you have this group of Russians holding in a forest that has no strategic significance whatsoever, but it just dug in and fought till the end. And I think that the Ukrainians are doing this way too often. Yes, they're very courageous. Yes, they're very stubborn, but sometimes against firepower, it's not enough.
Oh, that is in just attritional war doctrine is don't use resources on meaningless territorial objectives or gains. If there's not an industrial area or it's going to give you an advantage to launch further on, don't use it. You can continue rearwards, you can fall back. And I have a friend who's a very senior officer, and his main criticism, and I asked him like, okay, what is, what do you see? I was hoping to get, like a 10-page written back to me in an email about like, this is what I see the problems are. And it was like 2 lines about Ukraine's biggest problem is they're obsessed with optics. They're obsessed with how things look, not exactly how things are. And I was like, one, I was disappointed. I was expecting more, but then I got like, no, that's like an image tells 1,000 words. I'm like, no, that says a lot. If you apply that thinking to things, it's like we care more about how it looks rather than what objective it actually is. And I think Volchansk, with the Russians pushing into Kharkiv, was similar to this as well. What real advantage did that give the Russians in the whole war? At that time, not that much. Fall back, go to better fortifications, repulse Russian attacks, be prepared to lose a little bit of ground, but put yourself in better positions. But the optics there was counterattack. Now it's stuck in a war of attrition within Volchansk city centre now for months. And I think
Look,
similar.
One operation that could have been interesting would have been to attack in Kursk, attract all these Russian reserves, and then push with and then for the Ukrainians to push against Vovchansk, for example. That would have made tactical and strategic sense. Okay, you attract the Russians away from where you actually want to attack. You attack a sector that was poorly defended, and then you pull out immediately. Or even if you hold the ground, there's something going on. There's a logic to it. They haven't attacked in Kharkiv. Because if we take into account that the Ukrainians want to get back their borders, it makes sense to push the Russians out of Kharkiv Oblast. But they haven't done anything like that. So this goes back to what we said about the lack of operational thinking from the Ukrainian side. They only think about the brigade level. And they don't have this history of war college, understanding operations. The more I look into it, they don't have this planning. They only look at operations by sending brigades, but these brigades don't know how to maneuver together. Battalions don't know how to move together. And how many times I've read Western reports, once again, journalists that go on the ground and they say, yeah, battalions never train together. So you have battalion commanders that say, this is my area of operations and I'm not going to move out of this. Even if the second battalion on my right flank is getting overwhelmed, I'm not moving. This is the worst thing you could do. So you have an army of individual battalions. You can't launch any operation. And I think the Kharkiv counteroffensive and the Kherson counteroffensive have given Ukraine some sort of false confidence. They don't understand that the Russians pulled out. They don't understand that the Russians were really in a bad position and that it wasn't the Russian army of today.
Yeah.
So the Ukrainians were lucky. So how can I say, yes, there's merit to their offensive, 100%, but it wasn't the beast that the Russian army is now. So you can't pull these maneuvers anymore.
I've said this as well, that you're not going to get an opportunity again like you had in Kherson and Kharkiv. That opportunity, that was the, and Zhuzny said this, that the opportunity was 22-23, but he sees no way of independently ending the war, I believe, to maybe misquote him there. But this is some of the concerns I see, is that we saw that in the end of 22. But that's when then the 10-point peace plan was written up, was the end of 22. And I'm like, it's difficult to apply something then to a war then that was significantly different to right now. And what we're seeing in the front line doesn't reflect those goals. Like we see this 1991 border spoken about. And at this point, I'm like, we haven't seen anything that is close to show us that that is possible at this point in time. Like the 23 offensive, what was the most, probably the most, have the highest morale that the Ukrainian forces will have, because you had trailers released, you had the Crimean Beach Party planned, you had all new vehicles, you've got new stuff. And it, in some areas, maybe get 8 to 10 kilometers, but we're talking you need to have 150 in some areas. I just don't see how this is still spoken of. Yep, we need the 1991 border. Are we ever going to have an opportunity like that again, where the Russians are really on the back foot as they were at the end of 22, and at the same time have a high morale, well-equipped, well-trained force that we had of the Ukrainians at the time? I just don't see that as a possibility in the future.
It's not. And I think everybody in Ukraine is aware of it. They just can't say it openly, but they know that 1991 borders is off the table. They just can't speak about it because that would be admitting they're losing, which they can't. One possible scenario for the Ukraine war is something like the war between the USSR and Finland. So Finland, by every metric, lost the war against the Soviets. The Soviets took land from Finland first in 1940 and then again in 1944 and 1945. But Finland every time got away with it by saying they won, by saying, yeah, we lost some ground, but we resisted as a nation and we still exist. 100% Ukraine is going to pull off that card at the end. They're going to say, yeah, okay, we lost some ground, but whatever, Ukraine still exists as an independent country. We won. Russia did not conquer all of Ukraine, and hence we won. And how many times do we hear the millionaire deserter talk about this? You know, he always says, "Oh, Ukraine has not been invaded. Kyiv is still holding." Like, come on. If you lose a third of your land, still a lot. But I think this is what the Ukrainians will say. The problem now is that as the war goes on, as in every war, the demands change. So, as a reminder, when the war started in February 2022, I think the demands for the Russians was simply that the Ukrainians let go of Crimea officially and of the separatist republics. This is very important because we're not talking about the entirety of Donetsk Oblast and the entirety of Luhansk Oblast. We're talking about the parts which had separated. They just wanted Ukraine to accept that these republics are gone and that there's no war. So I think that was very, not fair would not be, but low demands. Now, there's no way Russia is going to stop the war and just pull out and say, that's all we want. So as the war goes on, the Russians are going to say, we keep everything we have up until now. And if the Ukrainians don't agree to this, the Russians might say, okay, we move on until you say, okay, this is where we stop. So in the worst case scenario, the Russians could take everything east of the Dnieper. If there is a collapse of the front, that would be a terrible situation. But once again, the Dnieper is a natural barrier that is a solid front, solid border. It's a river, and many countries have borders across rivers because of that, or mountain ranges instead of just fields. That's what I fear for Ukraine, is that there's a complete collapse and they go to the Dnieper.
Do you think that we could see a complete frontline collapse?
I think Ukraine still has the capability to fight. I think the Ukrainians are in a similar situation as the Germans, let's say in 1944. So they still bite. They can still bite and they can still fight. The Germans fought until the very end. But eventually it's just too much. So I don't know. Honestly, these are things I think about just when I'm wondering, you know, what could happen. But for now, the Ukrainians, I think their strategy is to make it as painful as possible for the Russians and hope that the war ends just by giving away part of Donbass. And that's it. Or just make the Russians stop after the Donbass by saying it's too hard, there's no way to keep going, and that's it.
What is your thoughts about those? Because a lot of the people that speak about victory and 91 borders and this and that, what I've said is the main criticism from my end is that their victory achievement is based on a collapse of the Russian forces, not success in Ukraine operations, if that makes sense. That they're not saying, no, we're going to have successful operations to push back through Crimea and push back through Donetsk. Is it we're going to have success in walking through those areas because Russia will internally collapse. The soldiers will walk off the front line. Someone will assassinate Putin or this or whatever. What are your thoughts on that when people say there's going to be some sort of internal issues in Russia, as we saw with, like, I guess, like the Bolshevik Revolution? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say they don't know history. They don't know history because that's exactly what the Germans had hoped for during World War II. They, until the very end, are like, we're going to make peace with the Western allies and then we're going to put all our forces against the Soviets. It was wishful thinking. The Germans during World War I also hoped that the Western nations just collapse from inside. Countries are much tougher than we think. So yeah, collapse happened, but the Bolshevik Revolution is a specific example, and I would say it's an outlier. It's not the rule of, like, it's not the rule.
With ideological involvement too.
Yeah, it's a very complicated mix of things, and Russia now is not in the same situation as Russia back in the days. There's no way. What I want to talk about is that the Ukrainians have this wish that the Russian army just collapses, and it's wishful thinking. Um, I don't think it will happen. The and also it shows that they don't understand. Even they don't understand the Russian way of doing. I'm not Russian. I've never been to Russia, so I only know from what I've read. But when you look at it historically, the Russians are never very enthusiastic to fight for their country, but they do it regardless. So they're not the type of people that are super happy, but also never like desperate enough to not join. They're in the middle. They're just going to do what they're told. Um, whether it's Peter the Great, when the Swedes were invading the empire, he called up an army. The army got destroyed by the Swedes. No problem. He goes into a new conscription draft campaign, and they have a new army in a couple months. Same thing with Napoleon. Napoleon destroyed one Russian army after the other. Every time a new army would pop up, the Tsar Alexander II had mobilized what 2, 3, 400,000 men during the 1812, 1813 campaign, and the people did it. There's no rebellion. They were not happy, but they do it. Same thing during World War One, World War Two. So when the Russians are called for to arms, they do it, and more likely, more often than not, they don't rebel against the country, especially if they're winning. You know, the Bolshevik Revolution happened because the Tsar was losing badly. It all depends on the power of the leader, but from objectively, Putin, I think, has holds on to power well, from what I see. Correct me if I'm wrong, but all this to say that I think the Russian population is behind him. And actually, as an anecdotal evidence, when I went to Dubai 1 year ago, there were a lot of Russians. When I mean a lot, every white person almost was Russian. And they spoke to me in Russian, thinking that I'm just another white Russian there, right? And but when you said you're Canadian, and when you talk to them, first of all, they don't like you. When you're a Western NATO guy, they don't like you. But from the sense I got is that this meant that they follow the propaganda of the Russian government. And these are the rich people. These are the rich Russians that go on vacation abroad,
Rich
that
and
can afford
yeah.
that can afford to go to Dubai and the United Arab Emirates. And even they, when they hear American or when they hear French language, English, they're like, oh, those are the enemies. So imagine what the people in Siberia and the Ural Mountains must think. So to think that the Russian population is against the government is a bit far-fetched.
What do you think of the idea that we see from bloggers and people on Twitter and journalists and mainstream too, talking about that Russia's industry will eventually not keep up? That we had in 2022, Russia has one or two more waves of missiles before they'll run out, and we've had predictions from a lot of people that have been and gone about Russia will be out of tanks at X date in X year. Now 12 months ago, 18 months ago, but people readjusting,
Mm.
no, but they are not keeping up the production to losses of armor, of planes, of other bits of equipment, that eventually there's just going to be nothing to actually give these guys at the front line. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I remember this. I think it's the problem with any data-oriented analysis is that bullshit in, bullshit out. So most of the information about the tanks comes from Oryx. So they used Oryx as the main source without understanding that Oryx, especially in 2022, it was the Wild West, like I said in my video. Like the claims they made, any burnt tank, Russian. How many Russian tanks have been marked as? How many tanks have been marked as Russian when could have been Ukrainian? So they used these numbers and extrapolated from this. First of all, nobody knows the real reserves the Russians have. Um, they have declared numbers of tanks, but maybe they go through Siberia in the Ural Mountains and they find another batch of tanks that the Soviets have built and just hidden there. We don't really know how much stuff they actually have. Maybe the Russians don't know themselves. They just discover new batches of weapons as they go. But so I think that's a problem. They overestimated Russian losses and underestimated their reserves. And simple calculation, they're like, oh, at this rate, Russia will run out. Well, we're almost 3 years later and still not 2.5 years later, and we're not there yet. So I think the Russians have more reserves than we think. And that's the problem always. The same way we talk about equipment is the same for human resources. They have much more reserves than we want to admit. And how many tanks, for example, can they refurbish? They have thousands of tanks. Even T-62s, okay, they can revamp them and have them on parts of the front. Maybe not use them for combat operations, active duty, but just have them sit there somewhere. It's better to have a T-62 tank than no tank.
Yeah.
Same thing for BMPs. They have hundreds, thousands of BMP-1, BMP-2 that are just hanging around, and they have the capabilities to repair them because they produce the spare parts and everything around this. And that's the big problem for Ukraine. Okay. You know your friend who wrote the the two sentences, instead of having a, who was it again? Who
Well, he was a senior
or
officer.
Kursk. Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, yeah. About optics.
So yeah, exactly. The problem is the reason Ukraine is doing this optics campaign, what we call the PR, is because they depend on the Western resources to keep the war fighting. They have to prove to the West that they can still win. So that's why they pull these tricks all the time. Now, what if Ukraine was able to produce their own stuff? What if they were independent? They would be much smarter in resource management because they don't have to pull these tricks. They build their own tanks. Let's say they can rebuild T-64s. It would be so much easier. They have one tank, the T-64 that everybody knows how to use, everybody knows how to repair. They have one line of production and that's it. They have one set of artillery, one set of everything, a very rational production. Now they depend on the West and they have all sort of equipment. You said it, they had Australian Bushmasters. They don't have spare parts. Then they have the French VABs. Then they have American this, German that, Swedish this. Yeah, okay, they're all NATO. They all use some sort of the same ammunition, but the spare parts, they're all different.
Yeah.
It's a mess. It is a logistical nightmare for the Ukrainians at the moment because they don't have this one equipment. So on one end, the Russians, they have one set of everything. They have been using these equipment for the past 50, 60 years. They can build the spare parts. They can rebuild new units. So yeah, for sure, Russian industry is not the best in the world. They're slowly ramping up their production of new BMP-3s, new tanks. But by the time they actually use up all their old Soviet stuff, they're going to have hundreds and thousands of brand new equipment. So it's taking them longer, but I don't think they're running out.
Yeah, we do see this idea that everything has a linear trajectory too. We see this, oh, well, there's an advancement of 100 meters today, therefore it's going to take 400 years before they reach X. And I'm like, what
Yeah,
is
yeah,
not
yeah.
linear? It's not how it works. And
No, it's not how
even
it
from
works.
what I see, Russia's using a lot less armor, or at least losing less armor on the battlefield with a change in tactics of, well, we have these guys
Yeah,
on motorcycles, or we have X, Y, and Z. We're using the FABs more, and we're using the TOS-1 a lot more as well, that you're hitting areas before the armor goes in, and you're having, at least from what we saw previous in the war, in the opening, way less armored losses. So you
yeah.
can't just say that it's going to be at this trajectory, therefore at this state there is just an end.
Also, I think the Russians have made how can I say this? They upgraded their military by using low-tech solutions. So I remember in one engineering class I had, and the professor said that when he went to Africa to, let's say, help, he was in Kenya, and there was a problem. He said the problem of American engineers there, they always try to offer high-tech solutions to the locals.
Yes.
These high-tech solutions are very complicated and the locals cannot maintain it. So it's too complicated for them, and in the end, nobody used it. For example, they tried to use, how can I say, they tried to make very advanced ovens for villagers, and they didn't know how to use these ovens, and they used them as trash cans in the end. So what a waste. But he said, okay, you know, in the end, low-tech solutions can be better. And this is what they've done. For example, he said there was a lot of traffic accidents, and they didn't know how to reduce the road accidents and death. In the end, they used stickers that said slow down, and they put it on every car, and it worked. It's cheap, low tech. Where I want to go with this is that the Russians did the same thing. So instead of trying to build super high tech artillery shells like the West was bragging about, well, they used their old Soviet artillery shells that cost $100 a unit. But now they have direct artillery fire. They can precisely target using drones. It's much cheaper to use a drone that guides the artillery fire of dumb ammunition than to have these super powerful shells. The Russians have infinite amount of those. The Russians also have infinite amount of these FAB bombs. And they're like, hold on, if we add a little glide system, it becomes much more precise. This is pure engineering. This is almost genius. And I think from sources I've talked to, the Russians also add these sort of glide systems to their MRLS systems.
Oh.
There's been videos where at times they use these to increase the precision of these cheap rockets. So once again, a low-tech, very cheap solution that is easily scalable.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the big problems that people talk about in protracted war, especially those talking about America v. China, is that American systems are so focused on precision firepower that, like you're saying, that they're incredibly complex. But in a protracted war where you're having a lot of losses, you're needing to absorb those losses and replenish. It takes so long to actually replace someone trained on X, Y, or Z system that it becomes so difficult. And we've seen this, say, with the Abrams. They are so complex. It takes years to be really proficient on it. You may as well, and like I've said, I think the best thing for Ukraine was know if this European country has, you know, Soviet tanks, but they're like, well, we don't want to be left without tanks, give them our Abrams and give those ones to Ukraine because they've already got some level of system on these. Don't try and reintroduce a whole new.
But that's what they've been doing. But the problem is that there's no more Soviet tanks left in Europe.
Yeah, well, it depends where else you get them from. But yeah, there's this whole idea that, and even into the NATO v Soviet doctrine in like ground operations is, well, we are so NCO based. What for short war is brilliant because you've got really high trained guys. You've got an NCO at the top, you've got a corporal and your soldiers underneath, and you can do these really high-end maneuver warfare elements. But if that corporal dies or one of those diggers dies, I spoke to some units specifically about this. If you die, it takes us 6 to 10 years to replace you. And there's one of you per 8 to 10 guys. And we can't absorb that quickly. To gain experience in protracted war, we have a big problem with actually being able to, from our engineering, from our pure equipment through to just NATO tactic, really good in like short, sharp war, like Desert Storm. But if it goes on years and you start having large losses, ability to actually, to get someone from today to be then proficient in some of our tactics or some of our vehicles or systems is not weeks or months, it's years. To be proficient, not just operate it, to be actually proficient on that. And that is one of the key differences between the Soviet system and NATO system is the ability to actually just absorb losses.
Yeah. Actually, spoilers. I think by the time you post this, my video is going to be out. But I'm talking about the U.S. Army during World War II, and that was the exact problem. You have a squad, but the casualties would be so heavy, NCOs, riflemen, officers, that they would constantly be replaced. So there's one discussion everybody has to have is how do you replace casualties? And that's exactly the topic of my video, but I'm happy you brought it up because the American system was have soldiers like spare parts. So you lose an NCO, you bring a new NCO. He's green, he's no experience, but he's an NCO. And then you have a greed NCO that has to lead veterans into combat. But the problem is the casualty rates were so high, the life expectancy was 1 week. So if you were 1 week in, you were a veteran and you could lead a squad just because you survived.
Yeah.
And what you say is the biggest problem of NATO armies. They've been so disconnected from having high losses that they don't even understand what it is like to lose so many people. The same way they don't understand losing so much equipment. How many tanks were lost in Afghanistan is like laughable.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest problem of NATO. And I think there is an ideological aspect to the war in Ukraine where Ukraine, this is my opinion, okay? I might be totally wrong, but I think even in the Ukrainian military, there's two sides. There is the pro-NATO side, which was represented by Zaluzhny, which was very liked by the West. He's this very open guy. You know, he's more open, gives interviews, is always there to walk around. He's the more pro-West. When the counteroffensive failed in the summer, it gave the other side, so let's say the pro-Ukrainian side, the edge. And this is where Syrskyi comes in. Syrskyi is the old guard that says, no, actually, we have to do it our own way. We do it the Ukrainian way. Because NATO tactics have failed. NATO training has failed. Like all the basic training given by UK, German, French hasn't given the edge to the Ukrainians. Yeah, okay, you can provide basic training, doesn't change anything in front of artillery. You can be a spec ops operatives. You sit in that foxhole, you're going to suffer the same way as a conscript recruited yesterday.
I've said this at talks as well, two elements of saying, don't, like, from the images I've seen of what you're doing is you're doing like this cool urban clearing doors, clearing rooms.
Yeah.
Like that is irrelevant from the guys I've spoken
Irrelevant.
to. I am like, things you need to focus on is digging, keep your fucking
Yeah.
on, keep your weapon loaded, and try and keep your feet dry. If you got 2 weeks or a week or whatever to deliver these guys training, do not try and tell them how to ply a doorway. Irrelevant.
Yeah.
They will figure it out when they're
100%.
there because it's going to be in a hectic urban battle. Keep their helmets on, keep digging in, keep your feet dry, and don't get killed. I'm like, that is what you know. Don't focus on this other bullshit. And we see so much resource put into that, and we've seen it fall apart.
Yeah, camouflage. Learn how to blend in, camouflage, dig in, hide. 2 weeks of that would be better than exactly like the door kicking thing. I'm like, come on, this is so war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan. I'm like, they're never gonna use this. Even let's be honest, how many houses have doors nowadays on the front? Everything is destroyed.
It's going to be hit by 500-kilogram fabs and TL1.
It's ruins.
That is the thing. You're fighting through ruins, and it's not going to be this urban facility in UK somewhere that you're fighting through, or some, mud hut through Afghanistan. It's not that anymore.
And so you're 100% right, and I hope people listen. But they're so let's say that's how they do it, and that's how they will continue to do it because that's how they've always done it. And the problem is the instructors don't know better. I've said it many times, and I don't want to be mean to those guys because they mean well. They put their hearts into it. They try their best to teach the Ukrainians, but they don't know what it is like to go through an artillery bombardment.
Yeah.
I don't know it myself either. But what I mean is that it's hard for them to actually teach. It's hard for the Western instructors to teach the Ukrainians the good skills necessary.
Yeah.
I think it would have always been better for Ukraine to have their own instructors in the West teach their own soldiers. So use the safety of the West and the facilities of the West, but have Ukrainian instructors.
Yeah.
I don't know why they use Western ones that don't teach them anything.
Yeah. Well, I know for a fact there's a big rift between the Western instructors and the Ukrainian veterans coming in because there is this, oh yeah, yeah, do it like this, guys. And a lot of the Ukrainians are coming back saying that doesn't work. No, no, no,
Mhm.
no. And it's like, no, that who the fuck are you? Like you may not, like most guys in NATO anymore have not deployed. There's a very high turnover. Most people have never deployed even to Afghan or Iraq or whatever. And there is some friction there between you've never gone up against artillery and drones, and you're telling us like this NATO superiority complex of our tactics and drills. No, this is the way we do it. And I know there is a lot of friction that gets developed there between combat veterans and the trainers who have had objectively way more training, probably years or some in cases decades of training, but not in this specific type of war.
Yeah, and that's the difference between another discussion, but between training and combat experience, you can have 10 years of training. It's like martial arts in a way, you can train 10 years, but it's the moment you have a real fight that you get the lesson, right?
Yeah. I've spoken at length about this. I'm like, it doesn't matter if in the SAS or you're in whatever, if you're sitting in a trench and a bloody 155 mil, well, some artillery piece hits you, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's 152, 155. It doesn't matter what patch you're wearing, that's taking you out. And I've often spoken that I believe you're coming from the infantry where we're very highly trained. I'm like, we also just need numbers also. But we spoke there about the potential you see in a Russian internal collapse. What
Mhm.
do you think could be the realistic nature if there was internal unrest in Ukraine? If there was a deal signed that is not, because the government for years has been saying 1991 borders is the only way, anything but that is not a victory. We see some of the messaging shift on this at the moment, but it has been pretty stringent that the sacrifice that your boys, that we are making is because we will have liberation of all our lands. We'll have Crimea and this, and we've seen, of course, huge casualties, huge suffering from the
Mhm.
ideological extreme brigades and units all the way through the army and all the way through the civilian populace from one end of the spectrum to the other. Do you think that there could be and seeing, your outlook on history and your knowledge there, do you think there could be some level of internal unrest against the government in Ukraine of saying, well, you promised us this and all my friends died or sacrificed because of this, and this is not where we've ended up. We've ended up giving away 20, 30% of land.
I don't want to be mean, but Ukraine always had the worst deals in history. Like as a history, Ukraine, for example, there was when I made this video about the Poland that wanted to create this brigade of Ukrainian volunteers living in Poland. There was this ceremony where in 1920 the Russians were at the gates of Warsaw. So the Bolsheviks, the Red Army was at the gates of Warsaw, and they were fighting the Poles, who were supported by France and other Western countries, but also by about 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers. Now, the big drama in this story is that Ukraine was always that close of having a country, and then the situation goes to shit, and they fall under the occupation of another country. And that's pretty much their history for forever. And that's it. So, and they don't rebel because to nowadays, so historically they haven't, and I don't think now they will rebel either. And also because the casualties have been so heavy, people are tired. If a deal would have been done, let's say in 2022, when you have a lot of veterans, more patriotic people still there, maybe.
Right.
Now they just want to go home and call it a day.
Mhm.
Now most of the people I know, they fight because they have to, but they don't want to think too much. They
Yeah.
don't know really what it is about. The example of Warsaw, what I wanted to say is that the Poles did win the Battle of Warsaw, And the Ukrainians really hoped that the Poles would then reconquer Ukraine for them. And the Poles said, you know what? We're stopping on Polish borders. You Ukrainians, good luck. So the Ukrainian freedom fighters, they lost their country. And that was it. Ukraine, I don't think I don't see it happening. Not now. Maybe, I don't know. The big problem in Ukraine from people that have been there, I mean, you've been there, so you can say it, but there's two type of Ukrainians. You have the Ukrainians from the West, so near Lviv and everything, that seem to live in a parallel universe where there's no war and they don't care about Donbass. A lot of people that have done interviews with these Western Ukrainians that actually speak Ukrainian, they're the only ones that actually speak Ukrainian. They don't care about the war. They don't care about Donbass and they're ready to give it away. That's not their homeland. And the ones fighting the hardest are the Russian Ukrainians, because that's their home that is getting taken away. And that's the irony of it all. It's the closest to the actual Russians, the Russian-speaking Ukrainians that are fighting the hardest. They're losing their homes in Kharkiv, Donbass, Donetsk, Bakhmut, Dnipro, like this region, the Russian speakers, but they don't want to lose their homes. They're so close to the war, it's personal. If you live in Lviv, you're not even getting shelled.
Yeah. Well, this is where I see, though, that this could be, some level of unrest or divide within Ukraine. It could be, well, these guys in the West, they didn't fight, you didn't go through it. We've lost our homes, we've lost all our mates, we've lost our families in the East. And, I think we could see, and this is, speculative, but I think we could see then Russian intelligence operations too, to try and radicalize people against the government or internal division there too. I think that is a realistic possibility whenever the guns fall silent, or operations to try and, push, hey, you got let down. This was the promise. This is what you gave, and it didn't work. And that could be some level of operation done, like the Russian-backed militias that already existed in Donetsk or Luhansk as well, pre-22 post.
I totally understand, and I almost agree, but I think the Russians now have a different. They would do something different, in my opinion, is that they would conquer the territories and say, you can come back to your homes and we'll treat you well. We'll forget what you've done. I think this is rather the message they'll do, because they need people to come back, because these lands are empty. They need people to come back, because otherwise there's no point, right? So they might just say, look, there's an amnesty, whatever you've done, you come back, you become Russian. And that's the end.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to be part of Russia, you're welcome. If you want to be part of this rump state Ukraine, whatever's left of it, you can. But I think this is what they're gonna do, because they don't want the prospects of Ukraine joining NATO at some point. The Russians are also very tired from this war. I'm not saying that the war of attrition has no effect. There's an effect even on the economy. It's hard. This war is hard for them. I'm not sure that they're ready to, let's go for another round.
Yeah.
Even the Ukrainians, they're tired. I'm like, okay, you've spent years in the trenches. Maybe actually another possibility that I've thought of is maybe they might have a very radicalized government, even more than today. But I don't know. Like, there's so many options that are possible.
I've even
I don't know.
people speculate against a very anti-West
yeah, that's what I mean.
It could be seen to, and we'll get onto the big plan now, that I think a lot of the messaging is becoming, it's not any internal issues that cause the problem we're in. It is all the West's fault that we haven't joined NATO, we haven't got these weapons. I've seen a lot of people go, you could be developing a very anti-West idea within Ukraine, because all the messaging has all been external, that it's the West, they haven't supplied this, they haven't supplied that, blah, 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 rather than there's also been internal. Yes, there has been external issues on supply for
Yeah.
weapons, long-range strikes, policy, whatever. Also, a shitload of internal corruption command issues that have taken place, but all that is pushed aside. And this is what I want to ask you about what your take on the victory plan was, because my take on the victory plan, I'm not sure if you've seen any of my recent videos, but is what in business is called the poison pill, which is if you are in business and you have an impossible task, what you do is then you set impossible demands on external sources. So if I need to build this bridge and it becomes impossible for me to do this, what I then do is the demands on my contractor, the demand on whoever's supplying me the materials, I make those demands impossible. So when it comes to the end point that, hey, where the fuck's the bridge? Why isn't this up? The blame gets shifted off me and go, well, it would have got built if the contractor did this, and it would have got built if the material company did this. And that's my reading of the victory plan, is it is purposefully has unrealistic demands. Number one, invitation to NATO. Number two, long-range strikes, both of which we've seen asked for a large amount of time and turned down repeatedly, and we've seen basically turned down again, that is purposeful to shift any blame away from any internal problems and put it onto externally, that if we have to then have some deal or a negotiation and maybe a territory concession, that the government in Ukraine can go, this is because of the Western states not supporting us, not due to any problem. We would have had that if they supported this plan. Because they haven't supported this plan, we've had to have now some level of concession. What's your thoughts on that and the victory plan itself?
I think that's a very good analysis. I think it's what you said is it made me think. I was, while you were talking about, I was thinking it's something that's very plausible. I definitely see the blame on the West 100%, because every time they're like, oh, why is the US has thousands of Abrams left in storage? Why can't they give it to us? They have thousands of this. Why can't we have it? Yeah, I definitely see something like that happening. It's definitely a possibility. Like I said, at the same time, I think Ukraine does want to join NATO for long-term peace, let's say.
100%, yeah.
So yeah, for sure they can blame the West, but if they do that, the West can be like, you know what, you're not going to join NATO and you're not going to join the EU either. Good luck, guys. So on the other end, I don't think they want to backstab. I don't think they want to stab the only hand that is reached out to them. They know that the future of Ukraine is with Europe. They have made this decision to break ties with Russia. They have no other choice but to look the other way. Maybe there's going to be an economic boom after the war. Everybody comes back. There's going to be crisis and problems for sure, but you have a lot of cheap manpower that's looking for work. And German car companies are going to find very attractive to pay people low wages to build German cars.
Absolutely.
The same way they did in Eastern Europe. So a lot of companies are going to relocate in Ukraine, and instead of relocating to third world countries, they're like, oh, now we have a country where we can build stuff. So for Ukraine, the future lies with the West, no matter what. Yeah. Are they ready to backstep for a narrative? I'm not sure. I'm just not sure of, that's why I don't talk too much about this political stuff, because it's sort of out of, not my control, it's not the word, but it can go either way. And that's why geopolitics is so complex, because there's so many moving parts to say this is going to happen. Maybe, but then you have to put a date. That's the hardest thing. Yeah, you could say this is going to happen, but when or how? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's too early to say. Like, if we have this conversation, let's say in a year, maybe we're going to get closer. So usually I prefer to talk about the military aspects, because this is something we can see on the ground. You see the metrics, the maps moving, and you see what's happening. Of course, everybody wants to know the big picture. I think that the Russians are just going to continue. on the military aspect.
Do
The
you,
question is,
oh,
yeah,
sorry, you go.
no, but you can ask.
Yeah. What I was going to say, the Russians continue. This is one of the things, and I know politics isn't the point here, but people have said, oh, if Trump gets in, he'll end the war.
Mm.
What but the Russians may still choose to continue, but at the same time,
Mhm.
too, I think people have assumed that if Ukraine put forward a deal that is a somewhat realistic at this point in time, that is like, yep, look, we seize the border here or whatever, that the people assume that Russia will take that deal. Like people assume that Russia right here
Mhm.
will go, yes, we do this. But based on what? At this point in time, why would they then stop? And my other argument in this is too, if I was a senior Russian official and Ukraine for the last 2.5, 3 years has said, we're not negotiating, no negotiating, and then you suddenly have a 180-degree shift and go, we want to have some level of negotiation that's more within the wheelhouse of both of us, I would take that as the situation must be worse than we imagine. We are very close to victory. Let's keep pushing. That's how I'd take that. What do you
Yeah,
think about this idea? You say the Russians will keep going. Do you think that that is irregardless of what may be presented in the US or other systems delivered to Ukraine?
I'm not the only one thinking this, but I think from the perspective of Putin, uh, he wants to solve the problem once and for all. He wants to solve the problem of Ukraine once and for all. I think from the perspective of Putin, he's just repairing the weakness of previous Russian presidents that could have solved the problem without a fight if they had more balls and more will. He's just repairing what has been broken in his perspective. So, for example, people already in 1990, they said, watch out, there's going to be a war between Russia and Ukraine because of Crimea and Donbass. They already said it in the 1990s. So they knew it was an area of conflict, and the Ukrainians wanted all of it. They were not ready to give away territory. Okay. So the other thing we have to understand is that Putin is old, and we don't know who's going to be his successor. He wants to finish the task now because he fears the next one is not going to be as capable. So this is it. They're going to go all the way.
And what do you
Whatever
think,
all
yeah,
whatever
that's what I was
all
going
the
to ask.
way.
What do you think he sees is all the way through the Dnieper?
Maybe.
Mm.
Maybe because, like I said, the Dnieper River is a solid barrier, and it's a barrier that everybody would accept. Um, I also think that he's ready to take anything that he gets, but he wants to solve the problem of Ukraine. That's for sure. And as for Trump, okay, I remember Trump also saying in 2016 about de-escalating the situation in Afghanistan, but he also went into a bombing surge like no tomorrow, and he didn't pull out of Afghanistan, even though he hinted at it. So he's saying, I think Trump is saying this because it's an unpopular topic in the US.
Yeah.
And he knows a lot of people in the US are fed up with their spending, and he knows how to talk to his audience. So he says, yeah, we're gonna rethink it. But the moment he's president, he's gonna face the reality of being a US president. And is the US gonna abandon yet another ally? So the US has abandoned Iraq. The US has abandoned Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Then the US will have abandoned Ukraine. What messages is it going to give to the countries in Asia that depend on the US, Korea, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan? They're going to feel like, okay, you abandoned all your allies after catastrophic losses, the country's shattered and destroyed. Maybe it's a better deal to just surrender to the enemy now. For example, Taiwan, maybe they're like, okay, it's not worth the fight. It's better to be a Chinese province and have all our infrastructure and population than have everything destroyed and have the US say, nah, you know what? Never mind, it's so expensive. What?
Oh,
So
yeah, definitely weakens US position if that occurs.
so for all, maybe Trump is gonna do a surge. Maybe he's gonna be like a businessman. He's like, okay, we're gonna try one last time. We're gonna send everything we can to Ukraine. And if it doesn't work, then okay, we stop. Maybe there's gonna be a surge. You know, as a businessman, Trump might say, look, we're going in, not militarily speaking, but we're gonna send everything we can. And if that doesn't work, then we're gonna pull the plug. That's very possible. I don't
Yeah,
because the damage of just saying we cut ties with
yeah,
it's gonna make him look very bad.
brutal. Yeah, other countries will question all their security guarantees.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just gonna be such a shit show. It's
This is why I don't agree with the idea, and I say I reckon it's the opposite of what the mainstream media is saying, which is very typically correct as well. Is all the American mainstream, which is typically very left wing, uh,
yeah,
saying that all the Russian what I'm talking about, the voting influence, anything that the Kremlin is doing for the US election to try
mhm.
and change the vote, they're going, it's to push Trump into victory. And I have said, I think it's the exact opposite. If there
Yeah,
is
yeah,
Kremlin election interference, the thing you get with Trump is he is highly unpredictable compared to Kamala,
mhm.
and he sees himself as a bastion of traditional conservative values and the party. And I've said, if you look at some of the messaging coming out of the Kremlin, or you look at some of the world in a whole, you go, but the thing is, if Kamala gets in, she's already in power. It's going to continue. She's very predictable. It's going to continue the same way. And Russia will go, okay, we're going to have the same battle for the next 4 years if we continue the war as this. With Trump, he may come in, put the stamp down and go, war's not done. But he may go the other way, like you've said, and go, let's do a surge. This is the predictability problem. This is the unpredictability problem that Putin or his senior leaders will be looking at. As well as outside of this war, a lot of what China and Russia see as the downfall of the West will be these very liberal, left woke values they see as weakening the West's position around the world internally and externally. And Trump is, as many will see, many Republican voters would see, he's the kryptonite to that. And I'm going,
Yeah.
well, why do they want him in power? They don't want someone unpredictable who Russia's trying to paint themselves as the last bastion of European values around the world or conservative traditional family values. They don't want someone, people will compare the similarities between Putin and Trump. I go, yeah, but that's the exact reason they don't want him in power. I think it actually could be Kamala, could be actually more of a help on the international stage of around values, I guess, of the West, where people see America lying and internal division, but also, well, the war's going to continue on the same way it already is. And if the trajectory is we're taking 400 to 1,000 square kilometers a month, well, we'll just continue on that until we see a further collapse.
Yeah, why would they want a strong leader in the US? It's no, you're absolutely right. I think Putin even said he prefers Kamala.
Yeah. Which everyone
So
took as reverse psychology, but I think he might have actually been telling the truth there.
100%. I
Yeah.
mean, he said I prefer Kamala. I think the Chinese prefer her because, like you said, predictable, and you know it's gonna be some sort of weak response.
Mm.
It's not gonna be something strong. Like you said, Trump, he's unpredictable, but he's also like he's gonna go at it. He's gonna say, okay, this is how we run the show. And when you're in the US and you have a strong president, it's scary.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right, but I think it's because they're still on the story that Trump won in 2016 because of Putin, so they're like there must be ties. I'm like
Yeah.
it's so ridiculous. But we'll see what the US election is going to bring. It's pretty tense.
It's incredibly tense. And I've said this, that when we get that decision on who's won, we will see at that point whether there was all Russian interference or no Russian interference that through the media. So if he wins, it'll be this is all because of the Kremlin, and if Kamala wins, it'll be none because of the Kremlin. And The interference, how is there election interference in any election around the world in the digital age? Yes, absolutely. I agree. There's no big election anymore that has not some level of at least propaganda or messaging or some level of interference. It's just something in the modern age that I'm not saying it's a good thing. I think it's a terrible thing, but it's something we're going to have to live with, and we'll learn ways around. If you've got TikTok being the way people consume media that's run straight out of China, well, we're going to have to say, well, maybe it will push things further on algorithms than others. We don't know. But someone said to me too, is like, I don't doubt that there's this level of interference. How successful it is what I doubt. He says, because if there was some real successful tactic, we'd already see the Democrats or Republicans then trying to do that through their own promotion as well.
Mm-hmm. I think historically speaking, it always existed. So interference and undercover operations to tilt the population has always existed. Like, you just have to read through. We have provocateurs or agents going left and right. It always exists. Lenin was hidden in Switzerland. It's the Germans that brought him out and allowed him to take a train through Germany to go back to St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
So he was a foreign agent.
Yeah.
And so I think it existed for forever. It's just that now it goes faster. I think now it just goes faster. You can reach many more people at easier. I've seen both spectrums on TikTok, honestly. So once again, I think it's actually American companies that are way more biased. Way more.
I think
like Meta,
Facebook,
Instagram.
See, I think Facebook, Instagram. See, this is what I think the difference is Facebook and Instagram are so it'll push like more left wing, but only push them. Where what I see TikTok's doing, and where I see where I believe that China and Russia's sort of international operations for this, if it would be, is don't worry about left or right, create division. And what I believe TikTok is doing is if this person is liking right-wing memes, if it's liking Fox News, Trump, whatever, push it further. So try and make them further right-wing, try and push it further. And if they're liking left, try and what I think all they're trying to do is not one or the other. They're going, no, we're not going to increase our power of having the America or having more left or more right. It's going to be, we just need to create division. If we can create division, it distrusts the whole election system, because regardless of who wins in 17, 16 days or it is, half people are not going to believe the election result. And if you can create further division, that's fantastic. Well, fantastic, I should say. It's bad for everyone, but it's good for their operations, if that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, but I think that's just how software works. You know, having written software, you're going to push the content that people interact with the most.
Yeah.
So that's just how it is, because you want the user to stay on your platform. So if he interacts, let's say, with right-wing memes, and you see that he likes it, shares it with friends, you're going to give him more. If you show him left-wing memes, it's going to be, what is this shit platform? I'm out.
Yeah.
You want him to stay there and go through all the ads. That's how they make money. So I think that's just how software works. Create division. Yeah, I mean, it's always a double-edged sword, because you don't want too much division in countries that have nuclear power.
Yeah.
Like, imagine there was a civil war in the US.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing about, I say people go, don't worry about any Russian red lines or nuclear weapons or this, that. I'm like, well, nuclear weapons are used every single day as a tool of influence and coercion. They don't need to be firing to be this. The US on a global scale, Russia, any country that's nuclear armed, they act in a different way to other countries. And I don't care what someone says on Twitter or YouTube or Telegram. The US sitting in the Pentagon need to take into consideration these doomsday weapons that Russia and China and other countries have. It just needs to be. You can't just ignore that.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, to go back to Ukraine, it's do you think Ukraine still has the chance for another offensive or not?
I think they did when I can't remember if it was early this year. I think it was early this year. I spoke to a guy, one of the most experienced guys I know, both in combat, participating in Western countries deployed and combat in Ukraine, has been there the entire war and has seen things change. And he spoke to me offline, but I could share what he was saying.
Okay.
Of we need to mobilize now. And if it's not now, because his whole thing, and it lines up with doctrine, is he said to have soldiers capable of offensive actions, they need a minimum of 6 months of training, like a minimum of that. And I agree from my own experience, which is a 50th of his, you need a minimum 6 months to do offensive operations, not defensive. And then you need at least 3 to 6 months of experience in a secondary sector to develop a frontline experience, not only what keeps you alive, but also just getting used to what a war is like. You get used to the bangs, you get used to living in the mud, you get used to seeing death, and you need that amount of time to acclimatize in a way to this. And he said it's going to take 12 months from this point. And he said to me, and this was very early this year, if it is not done right now, we won't have an option again at the rate of which he was seeing loss. And he came to me because he's like, you're the only one that'll air this, and I'm hoping people will hear this to try and fix the problem, because people's just given hand shandies of this is going great does not bring attention to problems, and therefore it doesn't solve anything. And he was saying, I hope someone sees this and goes, right, okay,
no,
we need to address this. And what he said is we need to develop massive fortifications, withdraw to this as we can, form a really solid base, and give us that time to delay the Russian offensive, delay that, even if they're making ground, but to give us another 12 months to develop this offensive capable force. And it needs to be in the hundreds of thousands, and it needed to be done then to get 12 months of experience. So 6 months in, 6 months, and it's still 12 months from the day it started. It would be a minimum of 12 months. And I'm like, well, okay, even if we start tomorrow, which is not going to happen, it's going to be 2026. But well, if you start tomorrow, you're going to run into winter 25, so you're into mid 26.
Yeah.
And he didn't have high hopes of the war. And his biggest thing that he put me onto was, he said, I don't know the possibilities through winter with the FABs. He said the problem was we saw the FABs on the battlefield in 2023. We did see them enter, but they were nowhere near as accurate, nowhere near as numerous as now. Not even close. And he said the problem is, at least in the conditions we have at the moment where it's drier, the front line is more liquid. You can dig more positions, troops are moving, command centers are moving, whatever. And it's harder to spot on thermal, or even just through a typical naked eye drone, where you can see, you can't see footprints like you can see in the snow. You can't see tire tracks like you can see in the snow. And he said his biggest fear is the FABs during winter, because he said, well, then we're not moving positions. It's going to be stagnant. And this is the first winter where we're going to have these weapons, which are devastating on the front line and a very stagnant front. And he said, the Russians may just absolutely flatten these positions, because winter affects vehicles, artillery, troops. It has very little effect on Su-34s dropping these bombs. And he said they're going to have better target acquisition, because drones are going to have better thermal, and they're going to see footprints or tire tracks or whatever in the cold. And he's like, he said he was worried about winter and worried about the mobilization at that point. And I reckon I've got the notes here somewhere, but I did a video on it, and it was basically said he believed that this is Ukraine's last chance early this year, mobilize everyone, have a serious discussion with the West of, like, you need to take on all the training. You need to not train 5,000, 10,000. No.
Yeah.
No, Australia, you're getting 20,000 guys arriving in Australia. France is getting 20,000. Germans getting, they can keep up with that. Like, at the end of the day, the amount of Ukrainian soldiers we're training is bullshit. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, you could. So my unit, just out the road from me, was about 600 guys, around about that. Just don't worry about formal training. Just give us give us 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers. You're going to have one private or one, a corporate, whatever. You're going to have a fairly trained guy into every 3 guys. Go out in the combat training area and run through some drills. We could get guys, a lot of guys, to a minimum, a lot faster than we are, because I think the West has really tiptoed in commitment here. And that's what he's saying is we need to train these guys to have a 500,000 strong army there. I know it's a lot of problems, but
You know, I
so
think one of the problems is the language barrier. How do you do?
yeah, oh, there's huge problems. Can it be
So
fixed?
how
We
many
need to go back to
translators do
war.
you need? Yeah,
Yeah,
you can. Okay, let's say you have 600 Australians.
yeah.
Okay, you have one guy with three Ukrainians that don't speak English. How do you do it?
We barely speak fucking English as is. Yeah, no, no, I agree. Could we have done something? But what you need to remember though that there's a lot more people would find in Australia who speak Russian, so they'll understand
Mm,
that. Like, can it be fixed? Like, my biggest criticism is the West have not gone. The rhetoric that we say about this is an existential threat to the West has not reflected our commitment at all. If Europe honestly believed that the war in Ukraine is existential to the entirety of Europe, we wouldn't have this conversation around, oh, can we deliver
mhm,
this system or can we train this guy? No, 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 no. It would be, okay, everything at once here, regardless of how expensive it was, because existential means you don't exist
mhm,
anymore. So to answer your question in short, at this point in time, I don't think we'll see another major offensive. I think
mhm.
they're relying at the moment on a Russian internal collapse, which I believe is further away than what it was in 22. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and if there is some level of uh, offensive, regardless of what it's taken, it's probably going to be a Pyrrhic victory because of how costly
Mhm,
that is going to be. And there's not going to be enough men trained ready to absorb that loss because it needs to be simultaneous attacks, one after the other. You can't have it needs to be successive and simultaneous. If you need to reintroduce maneuver to reintroduce maneuver into a stalled battlefield, you need simultaneous and successive attacks, multiple fronts, one after the other, regardless of the fate of that attack. And that is, you need a lot of training, a fucking lot of training. I don't believe a NATO country could do that right now. That it would take a long time to learn. At the start of the year, we work up from
mhm.
section or squad, so 4 level, to section, so 8 level, then platoon to company to battalion. By the end of the year, battalion size exercises. And I tell you, at the start of the year, if you said we need to do a full armored assault, we would fuck it up with very
Yeah.
experienced guys. Um, but it needs to be that, and that's the point. It's regardless of the success of the one previous, you need simultaneous attacks and successive to reintroduce maneuver and get them on the back foot. And I just don't see the
Yeah,
commitment
yeah,
by
yeah.
the mobilization or the weapons is there. And that's where I don't know if you saw the video where I did my own victory plan and I came out in a green undershirt. I went
I didn't
undercover
see it. No.
Zelensky. Was what I said was the victory plan should have been like point one, these weapon systems, but the annex is, and we will mobilize 500,000 men. Because if you're asking for systems, a lot of the American pushback is, are you prepared to mobilize the people to be on the back end of these systems? And then Ukraine will push back and go, we are, if you give us the systems. So there's this
Mm,
butting of heads straight away. But as far as offensives, I don't know. Personally, I think the smartest move for Russia, and this is, I'm not some level, some colonel or general. I think the smartest move for Russia would be to actually draw Ukraine into an offensive. I think right now, if they wanted to end the
yeah.
war fastest, would
Yeah.
be a deception tactic to sit back in the Surovikin line to fortify what they need and make Crimea look realistic, draw an
Mhm.
offensive, and have devastating losses. That's where I'm surprised Russia's on the offensive right now. Um, but again, I don't have all the numbers that classified material would have, or the experience of anything. I'd command experience of 8 dudes. That's it. But what do you think? Do you think that there is an option for a further offense?
I think what your senior officer said, everything he said is true. Um, I only think I think the problem of Ukraine, like I said, the only real problem of Ukraine, like we talk about everything around, but we go back to the core. It's corruption and complete disorganized system. So as long as they don't fix that, everything else will not be possible. So if they don't solve corruption, so after I did the video on the attrition and I talked about corruption, 5 days later they arrested the family. Surprise, surprise! That gave fake medical like handouts, like how do you say it? Disability handouts
Yeah.
after a bribe. They were caught with $5 million or something. That's one. How many people have done the same? So if they don't deal with corruption right now, that they should have done that right at the beginning. You know, that's what we say. Mobilization right at the beginning, corruption right at the beginning. Now it's dragging on, but now it's now or never. And a more organized system. That means before launching any type of offensive, they have to ditch the system of having brigades as tool for operations. It doesn't work. Once again, I think this is the NATO doctrine of having brigades as the combat unit. But in a true conventional war, you need a bigger unit. So you need a division. Let's say one division with 3 regiments is very good. And each regiment, you know, every regiment commander has their axis of attack, but you have a division commander responsible. And then you have a corps. There's a reason why people have been using it for the past 200 years, because it works. But modern technology, they thought that they could just outdo this. So I think this is the most important right now, because what's the point of trying to mobilize 500,000 men when we know how Ukrainians are? They're just going to bribe their way out or they're going to be mobilized and you're still okay. The problem is, and that's, you need to understand Ukraine, how it is now. Okay, imagine they do mobilize 500,000 men. They're going to bribe their way out of the front line. So yeah, you're going to have 500,000 guys, not a single rifleman. They're all going to be cooks and Photoshop, Telegram admins. That's all what you're going to get. To really solve the problem, you need an internal reflection on what Ukraine can be. Like, you have hundreds of thousands of deserters, guys that are listed as soldiers. They're not nowhere to be found. Same thing for all the guys outside the country. At one point, you have to be like, okay, do we want to win this or not?
Yeah.
I think that's the big reflection. Okay. Yeah. Ukraine has to sit down with itself and be like, okay, do we want to win or we're ready to fold?
Yeah.
And if they want to win, okay, well, corruption has to be solved. We've heard so many stories of, you've probably heard it from your sources, but on my end, companies have to bribe their way to get ammunition.
Yeah.
So you have an ammunition depot and they're like, okay, you want more ammo? You got to pay. Yeah. Come on. How is this normal? And so yeah, you can send as much ammunition as you want. If these guys are corrupt and they're not doing their job properly, well, it's the frontline guys that are suffering. How is it okay to send guys with 1 week of training to the front? It's, like you said, they should be sent to secondary parts of the front. You know, it's okay to deploy them, but you deploy them to the Dnieper or somewhere where there's nothing going on. You don't deploy them to the harshest part of the front. Yeah, so they need to rethink the entire way they're doing their military. Having brigades at half strength is useless. Change the structure of your military, but don't have brigades that are meant to operate with 4,000 men and have them 2,000. No, it's dumb. So I don't know why they're doing this.
Well, this is one of the biggest problems I see that is affecting everything, is that any voice that voices concerns or has any criticism, anything, is considered that you are pro-Russian, pro-Putin. Like, some reason, like that's become like, it's like calling someone racist. It's become this, no matter what is said from then on, what they say doesn't matter. That I know you're a racist or you're a sexist. They could have a real point. You say that, it's somehow seen as like this kill shot, and it's like, don't listen to whatever they say. And anyone from any Western politicians, internal politicians, even people in the media, if they raise a criticism, like this video, for instance, will be like that. What you've just said is they need to tackle corruption because it's having a huge effect, is seen as, oh, he's a Putin sympathizer, Russian. But the problem is, it just shoots down any realistic criticism or concern.
Look, if we were that, like, paid by the Kremlin, they wouldn't want us to show any weakness in the Ukrainians. We want to say, no, the Ukrainians are doing fine. Just keep going.
But
Like this is
yeah, I wouldn't be running ads and selling shit on eBay to try and fund myself while I'm off on surgery. You know, I wouldn't be.
people
It's
are so
ridiculous.
dumb,
But
right?
this is,
But
but that is, but this what I'm saying is this is what a huge thing
yeah, yeah.
is. You can't criticize without being labeled as that. And if you said to even mention corruption anymore is seen as like Russian misinformation, and you're like, no, 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 that fucking exists and it's having a huge effect on the front line. I actually
Yeah.
like I will say I'm pro-Ukrainian. I want Ukraine to recover their lands. I think it is their right to defend themselves against this. Even if people in my audience will directly say you're wrong, blah blah. I don't care. Um, but I say to people, I think I'm more pro-Ukrainian than these NAFO accounts who they are just showing the good stuff because I'm going, well, at least I'm actually trying to get them to win. Because by you saying we're having a beach party and I'm attacking history legends, that is actually not bringing any attention to the actual core issues. Like
Yeah, yeah.
core issues of if you want to help Ukraine on the front line, start calling out corruption, command issues, and internal disputes that are having an effect on the front line of the boys.
Hmm.
Because the boys in the front line couldn't give a shit about if some Russian channel says this, it's disinformation, misinformation. What's affecting them is somewhere back through the line, there's corruption,
Hmm.
stealing ammo they could use or not willing to mobilize guys to come and support them. And I'm like, you might think I'm critical, but I actually want to help. Like, in a way, I'm trying to help that problem because I have many friends who have died and many friends who are still fighting on the front line. A lot of my mates went across to fight in foreign legions. A lot of them left because of the corruption command
Hmm.
issues. And of course, I spent time in Ukraine before the war began. I've got a lot of friends from pre-war who are there fighting or have died. And I'm like, I legitimately feel like I have some skin in the game, but I'm
Hmm.
looking at these issues and going, oh my fucking God, like how is this still happening of this corruption command? Um, and it's
Yeah.
it's it's really
Or
helping, it's really taking away hope.
yeah. 100%. There's so much to be done, like in a structural way. Like it's not even about tactics or anything. It's really fundamental things that have to change. Um, and if nothing is done, we're just delaying what's inevitable.
Well, but you're increasing the suffering too. If that is the inevitable, uh, you're increasing the suffering potentially years of people and of young guys dying too. And I've spoken at length about this, that I think Ukraine with the West need to sit down, call a meeting and be like, right, are we going to win? Are we going to, what are we doing here? Are we going to actually mobilize and you go give us the weapons to have some real system here and help us with corruption? Or are we just delaying the inevitable but increasing suffering on our population and delaying the ability to rebuild? Because, well, if we stop right now, well, then, okay, we're going to be rebuilding. We'll enter the EU. We'll have all of this. We'll have potentially an industrial boom. But if we continue this and it's inevitable anyway, in the trajectory that this is going, uh, we're just delaying any of that by years and less territory and less men to the point where anything may be Pyrrhic anyway.
Hmm.
So I think there needs to be like a real look at this rather than just drip feeding in or messaging and being like, what is the real actionable goal here? And I'm not seeing people say there's some four-dimensional chess game going on. And I've said potentially in the first couple of months, in an attritional protracted war, eventually those chess moves they're off the table. You're not going to see something sneak up on you that's, oh, there is a 2 million man army in reserve somewhere. That doesn't exist. We'd know about it. It's too big. It's too big to hide.
Yeah, so because of that, I don't think that it's would be wise for Ukraine to carry any sort of offensive operations.
Hmm.
They need to to pull out of some places. For example, the Uskal River. Now the situation is kind of shit there. The Russians just reached the river.
Yeah, from
Uh,
Pashani front. Yeah.
you and I, we spoke about this. It was bound to happen. Now, the problem is, um, the wise move, what the Russians would have done in that situation, you pull out. You bring all the troops on the west bank of the Uskal River. which is a big river, and you defend from there. You need way less troops, and you give some fresh air to all the troops holding the front. You can have rotations. It's a natural barrier. It's hard to attack, and it bottlenecks any Russian offensive. It would be the wisest move. But we know the Ukrainians, they're not going to do it. So they're going to trade manpower for space. And with the hope that the Russians are going to collapse at any time. And I think that's the problem. If you take out this aspect that the Russians are going to collapse at any moment from the Ukraine strategy, it all falls apart. You know, it's that like the wooden tower, and you pull that piece out,
Jenga.
it all, yeah.
Yeah.
It all comes crashing down, because that's every strategic analysis from everyone, every commentator, everyone is that we're going to do this because Russia is going to collapse at any moment. But if you take that out of the equation, it all crumbles. And then you're like, okay, maybe we have to rethink. Russia doesn't have unlimited anything, but at this rate, they can sustain this for a while.
Yes. Well, there's even other think tanks that say, oh, in a decade, Russia will have an even more powerful military. And you're like, well,
check this out. For example, one of the regions that suffered the highest casualty rates for the Russians is Bashkortostan, the Bashkirs, near Kazakhstan. Okay. It's a poor region. Of course, there's going to be a lot of volunteers in the military. They lost, wait for it, a significant number of their male population, 0.3%. Yes. They lost 0.3% of their male population, whereas during World War II, they lost 20 to 25% of every standing male.
Yeah.
Now it's 0.3%. So if they've done the sacrifice in the past, of course, it's not the same type of war, but they can easily go to 0.6%. Okay, 1%. It's a lot, but it's not a lot.
Yeah. And this is, economically collapsing, people say, or financially collapsing. People look at the defense spending, and it by the variables I've seen, it's like, well, it's not high enough for that. It's I won't remember now, but I reckon, are they at like 7% defense spending at the moment, or armed forces spending, the Russians, something around this, that a lot say, well, yeah, but you need to be more at like 15% before you're really risking a collapse at this point, if those numbers are slightly off. But what I was reporting is this idea that everything's going to internally collapse. And I think, not to get too political or maybe speculative here, but I also think the Americans are like we spoke about, you don't want America, like Russia and China don't want America internally collapsing because they're a nuclear armed state. I think the Americans as well look back and go, we were very fucking lucky at the collapse of the Soviet Union. That shit didn't go really south really quickly.
Well, look, there's a reason why they got rid of the nukes in Ukraine. Let's just say that everybody was very happy.
Yes,
knowing these guys, they would have sold them to Iraq.
Go and watch the Netflix documentary called Operation Odessa, where a Soviet submarine is tried to be sold to the one of the cartels.
Are we surprised? Are we surprised though?
No, but I do think too, there is this pullback from the US too, that if it really looked like Russia was going to like collapse to the extent where people are saying of this is going to be Eastern Ukraine, you'll see people draw maps and go, we'll own this bit and this. I think people would, like the Americans, be like, yeah, but that's existential. That like, what's stopping that? Like, okay, we're going to end it, boys. Push the button. So I think this is one of the things that America is not walking towards the edge too. That is really to the detriment of Ukraine too. I think it's such a hard spot that they're in at the moment. It's bloody impossible.
Yeah. No, 100%. The big question I have is what. Okay, you know what? I think that the strategy for Ukraine at the moment is the following. They know that the Russians want all of Donbass because this is the war objective for Russia. If Russia doesn't get the Donbass, they cannot claim a win. There's no way. Okay? So the Russians almost took all of Luhansk. Maybe they did recently take all of it. Maybe Ukraine still holds 0.1% of it. But let's say Luhansk is gone. Donetsk is left. Donetsk is what? 70% Russian, 30% Ukrainian, and all the big cities are still in Ukrainian hand. I think the strategy for Ukraine is to hold as much as possible of Donetsk Oblast to to take away this Russian claim of victory, because one possible scenario is that the Russians, the moment they take Donetsk Oblast, they stop.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you're correct. You're correct. Yes.
So the Russians might just say, "Okay, mission accomplished, we won," and they dig in and they say, "Okay, we stop there,"
Mm.
and and every country is gonna be sort of like, "Okay, Ukraine, time to stop." So it's not gonna be this big final collapse that everybody talks about, but everybody's gonna tell Ukraine, "Okay, it's time to stop."
Yeah.
So that's definitely a possibility. So for the Ukrainians, the longer they hold on to Donetsk, the longer they can still find a way to win the war. I think that's the strategy. That's why they're holding on to every city in Donetsk as if it's the last inch.
Yeah.
But it also means we're going to see the battles of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, these Kostiantynivka, Druzhba, like these lines of cities. This is going to be massive. This is going to be Bakhmut times 4.
Yeah. Well, I personally think, like my friend's telling me, that all the Russians really want to do at this point before winter is to get into a position where they can bring Su-34s more safely into drop FAB to drop fabs on these areas, and just spend a massive bombing campaign before any further assaults from there. And all they're trying to do is they can reach those areas now, but it's because they're sort of this jet sort of in an area of active air defense. That okay, let's make right now the best possible front for those to get in over the months of winter. If things do slow down or stop, which is very likely, that they can keep hammering, and when we restart, we're in a much better position at that point. But I do agree with you, sure.
No, but
Yeah.
why do we think they're going to stop in winter? The Russians love winter.
I think it will slow purely.
Urban warfare in
Yeah.
winter there's no difference. Look at
Yeah.
Avdiivka. They essentially took the city in winter. Same thing for Bakhmut. Like, okay, it was spring, but the Russians love fighting in winter. This is their element. And especially that in Ukraine, it's not that cold. So northern for maybe for an Australian it's cold, but
It's freezing for me.
but for as a Canadian, I can tell you what southern Ukraine is witnessing is like it's hot. It's not cold.
Yeah. You think
So
they
the
can keep
cold,
the offensive pace that they've held through this year?
100%,
Winter?
100%. The heavy snow is in the north of Ukraine.
Mm.
There's no fighting there. The south of Ukraine is pretty warm, and sometimes there's snow, but there's not always snow. It's just that the ground is a bit harder, but it's like fall. So you can continue offensive operations, no problem. It's not even that hard for the troops. It's not that cold. Yeah, it's 0 or something like that, but it's manageable. I think they're gonna ramp up operations because if they stop the Russians, then the Ukrainians have time to recuperate.
Yeah, keep on
What the objective of the Russians right now is to keep the offensive going because they know this is where they're grinding down the enemy. The moment the Ukrainians get off the hook, they have time to form reserves. And this is what the Russians don't want. The Russians want the Ukrainian reserves to be grinded down by the FAB bombs.
Yeah.
Put in position in trenches that will be blown up. So the best for winter, what we can expect is the Battle of Kupiansk to start. Now it's a matter of time. Write this down, Matt.
I am.
But
I take notes the entire time. People think I'm on my phone.
no, I saw your pen. But I think Battle of Kupiansk, very likely. Battle for the Oskol River makes sense. Battle of Chevsivir, yep, makes sense. Toretsk, the Russians might finish it. These are the battles. And if you study World War II and how the Soviets were maneuvering, now Pokrovsk, the Ukrainians are having put all their forces there. Then the Russians are like, perfect. Keep your best troops there. we're only a couple of kilometers away. We can always come back later, but for now, we're just going to take everything else. So they're going to expand on the right flank, on the left flank. So if you look at the map, you know it by heart. On the right flank, it's Toretsk. This is what the Russians are aiming for. And on the left flank, it's the south of Selidove.
Yeah.
So this is exactly what they're doing. They're clearing all the flanks right now. And there's going to be urban battles, and they're ready for it. And they're going to push in all the directions. And the Ukrainians will have to give in. And this is the exact tactic of the Russians. They have more troops. And when you have a battle of attrition, the Russians bring more troops. They can afford this battle. The Ukrainians cannot defend everywhere at the same time. This is the conclusion.
Yeah.
They will have to choose.
It is a rough winter ahead. And I don't know, some of the messaging I'm seeing at the moment, I don't know if Ukraine want to head into the winter. I think with some of the different messaging we're seeing come out of officials, I'm like, will we see some level of real negotiation then? I don't know. Because the civilian population and the soldiers have to go through what is going to be a hell of a hard time.
Before we end, because I'm gonna crash soon. But one thing we have to remember is that the Russians are sort of unwilling to negotiate at the moment.
Yes.
So that's one thing that we have to keep in mind, because there was 2014, 2015. How many agreements did they do with the Ukrainians backed by the West that led nowhere?
Yes.
Apparently, there were discussions in April 2022.
Yeah.
Everybody agrees that in Istanbul, there was an agreement that was being worked on. The West came in and destroyed it. So now for the Russians, every agreement with Ukraine is just another bullet they're going to take. It's just another scam. So why even waste your time discussing when the Ukrainians are scheming something? This is the Russian perspective.
Yeah. Oh, mate, I agree. They're very correct in some ways of paranoia towards how things will look and act from, if something gets signed. I go, well, how is this actually going to look into the future?
Yeah, 100%. So the most important what for your audience to remember is that the battle attrition is not favorable to Ukraine right now. If Ukraine wants to have a chance in this war, they have to work on themselves. Corruption. Take this war seriously. That's the only thing they have to do. That means have the entire population start building drones, start building stuff for the military, and not just party in Kyiv like we see so many videos. People are just partying. Like, no, your country's at war. Everybody has to do their part. If you don't want to be at the front, fine, but be useful. The corruption has to be solved. A more organized army. This is what Ukraine has to do, and rebuild trust between the army and the population. And that's the first step. Restart the production of tanks and very simple systems in Ukraine. So at least they have some independence and they don't depend on not shitty Western stuff, but overrated Western equipment.
Yeah. It's just too hard to maintain. Like, it's just,
yeah.
You got 50 there's that meme of that dude like having like stressing, and it's just like,
yeah,
Abrams. Like it's like, this is where I said, like, people, when Australia's getting criticism not giving Ukraine our Taipan helicopters at MRH-90s, I was like, I said at the time, I said, actually, the best strategic move of the Russians would be, we'll fund you to have these helicopters, because holy shit, it's going to take a lot of, those helicopters killed more Australians than they ever got used in any combat operations, and that is actually a fact. I'm like, you don't want that shit, trust me. Focus on what is simple, what is achievable, and what's usable, not things that look good. F-16s look good. They are an incredibly capable aircraft, but not if you got 10, and not if it takes a couple of 100-man team to maintain them.
The same with tanks, have 30 Abrams is pretty useless. Ukraine needs 200, 300.
Yeah.
30, meh, it's laughable. And when I did my research and I saw that the Western countries did not even send spare parts, I was
Yeah.
like, the West is not ready for conventional warfare. They're amateurs. They have these nice systems. They're amateurs. Same thing for the instructors, like we said before. They mean well, but they don't know. And that's the even for the West, there's a lot of lessons right now to learn. It's
Yes.
better to have a simple system for which you have a lot of ammo and spare parts than to have very complicated systems that are expensive and with all the mess that goes with it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's important to remember is that, like I said earlier, is that for the Russians, this is they consider this an existential fight, you know. Um, and for Putin, it's an important battle. He wants to solve this once and for all
Yeah.
because they've been at it for 10 years. Like we call this the war, we say 3 years, but it's actually 10 years. It started in 2014. And Putin has been at it for 10 years and eventually he wants to solve it. He's okay. I think he's 100% okay of having Ukraine part of NATO. Like it's to be expected. The entire border of Russia is now NATO. You have Finland, the Baltics, Turkey. It's okay.
Mm.
But Ukraine, so for Ukraine, the goal now is to really know which territories they're ready to give away and just to win time. It's better they lose ground than lose manpower.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And that goes into the whole idea of optics, attritional war. And I think Russia earlier accepted the attritional aspect, and Ukraine was convinced that they were going to have a Russian collapse and reintroduce maneuver, and it hasn't happened. And now they're 12 months behind a mobilization and armament. Um, it's very interesting. You say, like NATO's learning a lot of lessons out of this and equipment. Some of the problems is like, I want to live in a democratic capitalist society. Trust me, that's what I
Mhm.
want to live in. But with the military industrial complex that we've got, R&D and complex systems is what makes money. So you end up with this, oh, no, your tanks are shit because it doesn't have this brand new system. So we need to update. And you end up with far less systems. Instead of an FAB with wings on it, you have no, but there's this fucking thing that goes this far. And it's like, yeah, but how many have you got? Instead of just shells, you've got Excaliburs. But if the Excaliburs are jammed, you've just got we've got very few really fucking expensive shells. So I think our own system isn't fully pushed towards like war footing either, because it's like, well, like I've done a bit of work in the industrial complex, and it's one that's corrupt as fuck. But secondly, it's all focused on maximizing profit for X company selling something to defense or the
Yeah.
armed forces, not maybe winning wars. And this is
Hmm.
Rahman, what's his name? A guy talks about attritional protracted war. He just says
Hmm.
we're too focused on fighting wars as if they were battles, rather than
Hmm.
winning a war. Um, and one of the big things I see all the time online, and I'm like, what the fuck, is people go, China's not a threat. They have no combat experience. And I'm like, walk into an infantry. If I walked into the 7th Battalion, my old battalion right now, and said, right, who here has not deployment or operational experience, who has combat experience? I reckon the sergeant major, maybe two sergeant majors, potentially would have combat experience on a two-way range against an insurgency force. There is not a single person in the Australian forces who has conventional protracted warfare experience. And I'm like, don't this idea that, well, they don't have any combat experience and would walk over it. I'm like, when did we last have protracted warfare experience that was so heavy on our logistics and massive amounts of, we're losing 1,000 guys a day? We have trust me, the commanders who were in command when that was occurring, they don't exist anymore. They're either very old men or sadly not with us. But don't underestimate, under the, as he says, the galvanizing pressures of combat, how your enemy can adapt as well,
Hmm.
and how
Hmm.
we are
Hmm.
going to have to adapt to if we ever step into that. But this idea of
Hmm.
they have no combat experience and we do. I'm from an infantry battalion. I'm asking who.
You're right. I mean, it's I think it's a cope. It's a lot of people like to say this to cope, but no, the Chinese they're definitely a threat. And another thing I want to talk about is that the Chinese military, as opposed to many Western armies, they're preparing for one mission, which is taking over Taiwan.
Mm.
They're not so their navy, their aviation, their troops, they're training year long for that one mission. So it doesn't matter if they have no experience. The training, they're preparing for one mission. The problem of a lot of Western armies is that they're preparing for every scenario.
Yes.
So for example, I'll take the British military. The British military has so many possibilities. They're good at nothing. Like it's not an insult. That's most armies. The British have to defend their islands left and right. They're preparing for massive naval battles, but at the same time, they're also preparing for counterinsurgency operations, but also against Russia for conventional war, and this and that. So they have a lot of systems meant for a lot of stuff. So that's the problem of a lot of armies. They don't know really what their mission's supposed to be.
Mm.
China has one mission, and that, how can I say, it's lethal when one country works for decades for that one mission. The same way the Ukrainians before 2022, they prepared for one enemy, Russia.
Yeah.
That's why they hold on until now, is because that's all they've known and that's all they prepared for. The Ukrainians didn't prepare for fighting guerrillas in Afghanistan or Iraq or sending a peacekeeping force in Tanzania. I don't know. Their enemy, their one mission was Russia. They know their enemy, they know the terrain, they're prepared. Australians, they don't even know what war they will fight next. So they were in Vietnam, then they were in Timor, then they're sent in Afghanistan. It's always a new terrain, a new war, and they don't know what tomorrow is going to bring.
Mm.
So the Australian
absolutely.
military has to prepare for a lot of scenarios, which which spreads out a lot of resources.
Yeah. Well,
So,
in
yeah,
Australian forces, there is some confusion around what are we training for? Because it's like, well, we're a defense force. Are we training for defense of the country? Because that looks very different to what we're looking like. If China were to have a landing force, say, in Australia, that looks very different to what we've been focused on recently in the past couple of decades with insurgency stuff. Like this is vastly different to how it looks and
100%.
what we have. And I think the Australian force actually do pretty well with it, because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
my thing is the Australian army should be, and as passionate as I am about the Australian army, we should be like fucking very small, because it's like we should only be a force of like, because what I've said is if a country like China were to land at Australia, that means our Air Force and Navy are gone. Like if they've got here,
Mm-hmm.
our Air Force and Navy have to be maybe a couple of submarines floating around somewhere that the US would have acquired by now. But the Army's going to be like, oh, fuck, I'm going to be out there in my Bushmaster. Like, this isn't good. But our focus should be on on medium range missile tech, Navy and Air Force, which it is to a degree. I think it's adapted way, but it needs to have a real, are we for defense or are we for deploying an asset somewhere like into Afghan or whatever? And I think there is I think there's movement on it, but I think there's still some confusion on what exactly it is.
Because it requires the discussion of anti-woke themes as to who our enemy is. And not everybody gets along. And secretly, every army knows who their enemy might be.
Yes.
And they're preparing for it. Maybe they're not talking about it politically because we understand the problem, but every country has an enemy that could cause them trouble, and they're preparing for it. But the art is for the equipment and the military to go along with that objective of defending the country or dealing with the threat.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Look, I've held you for 2.5
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. We did this very last minute, back from your trip, but mate, honestly, thank you so much for everything. I do really appreciate it.
You look, it's my honor. You asked me this for this. I couldn't say no, and I know you're gonna go through some very challenging times. So, like I told you in private, if you need anything, I'm there. If you need any sort of help or you want me to, I don't know, anything, I'm there for you.
Come to Australia and sink beers with me, mate.
Yeah, bro. So
No,
yeah, man. It was fun. Like we're talking like this. We could go on for hours and hours, you know.
I know we have to cut it short because otherwise it would be 3, 4, 5 hours in and would be still
Yeah,
shit talking.
ex
But
exactly.
just quickly off the cuff, like if people are following this, they follow yourself. Where do you think they should consume some media from? Like if people are confused about like, well, I don't really know what the fuck's going on, and you release, a video bi-weekly or weekly, like where do you think people should really focus their attention to find?
It's just hygiene. So use critical thinking. You can use any type of source. In my videos, I use Western mainstream sources often, but you just have to make sure to cross information, make sure that it's always consistent with reality, and just keep this hygiene of news. So not take everything what is said uh, first grade. You need to reflect on everything because I cannot say Telegram because there's a lot of shit on Telegram. I cannot say Twitter. There's so many false rumors on Twitter. Uh, Same thing for YouTube. A lot of people make a lot of money with fake news.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, the North Koreans were
so
deserting and were killed, and now they're going to arrive in a month. It's like, hang on, it's not one unless they're deserting from Vladivostok or the 6,500 kilometers to you. Like, that's a long walk. Like, yeah,
look, these guys that promote these stories, they have embraced the dark side. Like they're gonna go with the wind and they're gonna take the cash wherever it comes from. I'm like, okay, that's your business model. It's not mine, but if your audience is okay with it, that's their problem. But that's the thing. It's just hygiene here. Think critical thinking. Nowadays we have so much information, it's very important.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Mate, you have a fantastic it's still a Sunday there, I bet. But you have
Yeah,
a
yeah,
great week
Sunday
coming
nights,
up,
yeah.
man. And look, thank you for the audience who's here listening. So mate, I really, really appreciate it. And everyone go follow History Legends. I'm sure the overlap of your and my audience is probably massive. Um,
Yeah.
but
And let's do this soon. Okay, let's try to make this happen again,
mate,
okay, soon.
anytime, anytime. Okay, mate, thank you very much. Cheers. Bye bye.